Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Brian A. Joyce Report. I'm State Senator Brian A. Joyce, and I'm currently serving my 8th term in the Massachusetts State Senate, representing the Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth District. That includes the towns of Avon, Braintree, Canton, East Bridgewater, Easton, Milton, Randolph, Sharon, Stoughton, and West Bridgewater. The purpose of this program is to keep you up to date on some of the current legislative work that I'm performing on your behalf, as well as to maintain an open dialogue on vital issues that affect the lives of you and your family every day. We also try to introduce you to some interesting guests who are some of Massachusetts' most important decision makers in both the government and the private sector. Our guest today is Tom Conroy, a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate election in 2012. Tom Conroy is a very impressive guy, currently serving as state representative of Lincoln, Sudbury, and Wayland, Middlesex County's 13th district. Tom resides in Wayland, is married to Sarah Sewell, and is a member of the, or she is, I guess, a member of the United States Defense Policy Board. Tom and Sarah have 4 daughters, 3 triplets, and a younger daughter. He has varied and extensive experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. In September, Tom finished a 600-plus mile walk across the state, during which he visited numerous cities and towns in all the corners of our great state. I want to welcome to the show Tom Conroy and thank him for being here.
Thank you, Senator, for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Right, for the United States Senate, wow.
It is exciting. It's exciting.
I want to read a little bit. I didn't get to just, I want people to get a full grasp of your intellectual heft. So in 1980, I was graduating from Milton High School and heading off to Boston College. You were graduating from where?
The Choate School, where JFK went.
All right. And then you went on to some second-rate, what was it?
Second-rate college in New Haven called Yale
College. University.
Yes, yes.
All right. Now, Yale University, when I spoke with Tom, I said, my gosh, Yale University, you have to be pretty bright to get in there. He studied the Russian language and Eastern European studies. Quote, to better understand the enemy. At that time, of course, we were still in the Cold War. And,
that's right.
You know, you and
that was the biggest challenge we were really facing as a
kids
country.
Our age thought we were going to go to war against Russia. It was just inevitable. You know,
and it was really defining and shaping how our government was viewing the rest of the world and our foreign policy.
Let me just add on about some of your intellectual prowess here. You went on to receive an MA in International Economics from Johns Hopkins University and an MBA in Finance from Boston University. He worked in the public sector for nearly 10 years, managing refugee resettlement programs in Southeast Asia and Haiti for the U.S. State Department. Upon his return to the United States, Tom conducted a military budget analysis for a Washington think tank. Later went to work for U.S. Senator Gary Hart, a Democrat of Colorado, and Barbara Mikulski, Democrat of Michigan. Maryland, I thought so. Yeah. Where he was a foreign policy and national security assistant. Throughout the late 90s and 2000s, Tom worked in the private sector at a public consulting group as an associate manager, where he helped the Mass Department of Social Services maximize its non-tax revenue. He also worked at Mercer Management Consulting and then at Marsh, Inc., where he worked in risk management. That's right. Elected to the House in 2006, Tom Conroy is now serving his 3rd term as state representative, serving on the Joint Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, Joint Committee on Public Service, Joint Committee on Revenue, is the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Healthcare Financing, and serves in the Joint Committee on Higher Education and the Committee on Community Development and Small Business. A very, very impressive resume.
Thank you, sir.
Now, before I get to the questions that were prepared, let me just go off a little bit and suggest that you are an extremely well-qualified candidate for the United States Senate that hasn't gotten some of the publicity that has been bestowed on other candidates. I mean, we've had candidates dropping out, right?
Yes, we have.
Seti Warren was kind of the media darling there for a while.
Yes,
the former mayor of Newton, the mayor of Newton.
Mayor of Newton.
First term, right?
That's right.
1 year.
Yes.
Yet got an awful lot of publicity. Now he's out.
He did.
Alan Casey has also gotten out.
That's right.
Bob Massey has gotten out.
That's right.
You're still in. How come I'm not reading more about you?
Well, hopefully that will happen. And now that we're really down to just two viable candidacies, Professor Warren and myself, and my belief and hope is that folks will finally be listening to my message, and I'll be getting the media attention that I think we've been, Alan and Bob and I have been deserving all along. Given my record of accomplishments, as you just read them off, my credentials, my qualifications, my experience, that is really resonating with a lot of the voters that I'm meeting, Senator, and getting a lot of positive feedback. And I think now it's due time for the media to pay attention.
And here's the point. I mean, Elizabeth Warren strikes me as an extraordinarily, competent, gifted person. 7 months ago, I had never heard of her, and yet I would pick up the morning newspaper, and there would be an article foreshadowing her entering the race. Now, it just struck me as odd where we had some very talented candidates, such as yourself, that hold elected office, that have extensive experience both in Beacon Hill and in Washington and in the private sector, in the educational credentials that you have. I was surprised not to read more about you, so I'm glad to give this opportunity for you to make your case to the folks in the 10 towns I represent and beyond.
Well, and thank you for that opportunity, Senator. Really appreciate it.
So let me go to a couple of the prepared questions. Now, this isn't exactly 60 minutes in hard-hitting journalism.
And God bless Andy Rooney.
God bless Andy Rooney.
Who just passed from us.
I will just throw some questions out there. You have an
Sure.
opportunity to expand and talk about anything you want, really.
Oh, great. Thank you.
The first is really just tell the voters a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. You heard some of my bio, but you might not know that I grew up in a family that didn't really have much money to speak of when I was a young child, and I tell a story as part of my stump speech about how my mother didn't even have a quarter to buy a subway token when I was born in the first couple of years of my life, raised in New York City. To buy a subway token to take me to the hospital when I was so sick I couldn't even eat. And when my dad came back from Vietnam, serving 13 months there, to a house he had never seen, without a job, without income, to a beleaguered wife with 5 sons who were bouncing off the walls and very hungry. Well, let's just say that life wasn't particularly easy for my folks then, but through a lot of hard work and dedication and diligence and a certain amount of prayer and some help from folks in the community, they succeeded, and they gave me an opportunity to have a great education, as you highlighted about my background, and I've gone on to have a lot of different achievements from there, and I do think I am the most qualified candidate out there to win this election next November, and I love serving in the legislature. As you do, it's an honor to represent 40,000 people. I'd like to just step it up to the next level and represent 6.5 million people. I think I've got a lot to offer. I think it was JFK who said, to whom much has been given, much is asked. I certainly take that upon myself to believe that I want to serve the public and represent people who perhaps aren't getting their voices heard down in Washington, and that's partly why I walked around the entire Commonwealth this summer. And
So are your folks still alive?
They are.
They sound a lot younger than, my dad was a World War II veteran. Your dad was a...
Well, you were the youngest of
the
several,
baby of 8, yes.
several children, I remember, yes. Yeah.
So...
I'm a middle child, 4 brothers, so 2 on each side. So a natural compromiser, mediator, somebody who can actually cross the aisle and get stuff done down in Washington.
Touche. I married a middle child, so I know they're,
They're complexes
they're the best,
and stresses.
No, they're the ones that make everybody else feel good. And, but in any event, so your parents must be awfully proud of you. Now you just walked across the state.
I did.
So tell me a little bit. Now that was fashioned after someone that did something similar in Maryland, was it?
Actually, Florida.
Florida.
I was fortunate when I served as an assistant to Senator Mikulski to get to know a gentleman, another senator by the name of Walken Lawton Child from Florida. He was a little-known state legislator in Florida in the late 60s, wanted to run for United States Senate, and proceeded to start in the northernmost tip of Florida, walked all the way down past Miami to the Keys, ended up winning that race. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to get to know him a little bit in the Senate, and got to know one of his staffers quite well. And indeed, that was really the model behind the walk that I took this
You were also fortunate to have a smaller state. You didn't have to do quite as much work.
Yes.
Imagine that, though, seriously, the idea that somebody's out there meeting and speaking with the folks for whom you'd like to go to work.
That's right.
As opposed to just broadcast of television commercials or direct mail, and really just kind of getting back to grassroots politics.
Exactly.
And yet, in today's era, it's going to be interesting to see if you can do it, because money has become such a really a disgustingly huge part of political campaigns.
Right.
We talk about, my former colleague Scott Brown is the Republican U.S. Senator currently.
Yes.
They suggest he may have, I don't know, $20 million next year for this re-election bid.
That's right.
For the Democratic primary, you have an opponent that has already collected millions and millions of dollars.
That's correct.
You're vying for some free media attention that is hard to come by.
Yes.
And then even if you get past that hurdle, you're faced with a guy with this huge war chest.
Right.
So it's an uphill climb. How do you overcome that?
It's very much an uphill climb. I think you overcome that by appealing directly to the voters, and sort of, you do need the media exposure first and foremost, and I think that will come in time. But the voters, as they focus on who is the best Democrat to win next November, I believe that they will more and more look to me as the best alternative out there. And then going head-to-head with Scott Brown, certainly there's going to be Mass Democratic Party money, there's going to be Democratic Senate committee money from Washington, but ultimately I think this is a national campaign, and the person who wins that race, and I certainly hope it will be me, will be able to get national exposure and national fundraising into this race. And I'm not saying that I'm going to raise $20 million, but I will be able to raise enough to compete effectively against him, and do that comparison for the voters when you can look at my voting record up at the State House versus Scott Brown's, either at the State House, as you well know, or down in Washington. Look at my record of achievements. Look at my understanding of the way the economy works and the sections of laws that I've written that are helping create jobs right here, right now in Massachusetts. And compared to me, Scott Brown's going to come across as an empty suit with an empty list of achievements, and I think the voters will decide ultimately that I'm the best one to represent them in the United States Senate.
I mean, admittedly, Scott had a very light resume in the Senate,
right.
where I served in the state Senate, and perhaps out of the 40 state senators, he might have been 39th or 38th in terms of heft within the state Senate. He is now clearly far more powerful than that, far more powerful as a potential swing voter in the U.S. Senate. But it does show that kind of a long shot can pay off, and that was the longest of shots.
Yes, it was.
And one factor in his success that I think is underrated, and I think is a real strength that you have, is campaign experience.
Yes.
He was running against Martha Coakley, who really had a couple of campaigns, but had almost gotten AG by acclamation, whereas Scott had run for selectman,
State House,
state rep,
yes,
lost for the state senate initially, then ran for the state senate. So he had this campaign experience that you have.
Indeed.
And frankly, Elizabeth Warren has never run a race, and so it'll be interesting to see first how she withstands some of the scrutiny, and second, there are some, it's a contact sport, and there are some pretty hard shots that will be thrown in all of your directions, and how a person can withstand some of those tough moments of a campaign.
That's right.
So I think your campaign experience is also an advantage.
It absolutely is, Senator, and this is a marathon. It's still very early. We're more than 10 months away from the September primary. I have run year-long campaigns before, and I said this even before the others dropped out. I'm the only one who has a track record of defeating an incumbent Republican. My district was represented by 40 years worth of Republicans before I won in 2006. So I am somebody that can appeal to not just Democrats, but also independents, and knows how to run successfully against an incumbent Republican. So I think, again, as voters hear my story and hear that part of my qualifications, they'll say, hey, this is a guy that we can rally around. This is a guy that can win.
I drove through Wayland just this past weekend, taking my son to a baseball event, and I didn't see too many triple-deckers there. So it does look like Republican territory. I think I saw horses. And
yeah, you might have.
It's a beautiful part of the state.
We're very privileged to live there, and it's got a great school system, as you might imagine, and
So
I've got a lot of
3 kids, 4.
We have four daughters.
Triplets
the triplets are 15, Madeline, Cashin, and Emma. Completely unexpected, and boy, you know, if you can get through the first year of raising triplets, you can accomplish a lot of different things in life that you didn't expect you could. So that gives me a little bit of courage and a little bit of confidence along the way too.
And then another daughter?
My wife wanted a normal, and I appeal to all your female viewers out there, and I get this at some level, and you must too, a normal maternal-child relationship, which she did not enjoy, and we did not enjoy the first time around. We were running and managing a nursery, basically, with the triplets, but that peaceful, serene time that a mother gets to spend with a child was not evident, and so well, we were fortunate enough to just have one second time around.
And how old is she?
She's 10.
10, okay. So we had, our third child was born when our oldest was still 2. So not quite triplets, but
yes.
And then 4 and 5 shortly thereafter. And now, I think it was just this past year on a Sunday, when I actually sat on the couch and watched the Patriots game for the first time in about 20 years.
There you go.
Where I wasn't racing off to a hockey rink or...
Yes, exactly right. We did not, well, I remember the first time that we actually had time to even open up the Sunday paper and try to read it. Was just not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, because exactly your point. You're playing dad and you're playing mom, and it's a very busy household, but it's very joyful. Okay,
so what is your message in terms of what separates you, or what makes you the person that folks out there would want to vote for in the Democratic primary next year, or maybe even get involved with your campaign?
Sure, a couple different things. I think the biggest, just like I studied the Cold War when we were young, because I thought that was the biggest challenge facing our country. The biggest challenge today is strengthening our economy and creating new jobs, and that's where my experience comes to play. There's no one else that has a track record of writing legislation that is creating new jobs right here, right now in Massachusetts. So if people care about that here across the state and across the entire country, you're talking to somebody who has experience doing that. That's point number one. Look at my educational background and look at the fact that I've worked in the private sector. A degree in international economics, an MBA in finance, 16 years in the private sector. And folks out there may not have correlated. I've been serving as a state rep and working in the private sector simultaneously, 80-hour work weeks. I'm a hard worker, and yet I've still been effective as a legislator. And the point being is that I know how job decisions are made. I know how CEOs think, boards of directors make decisions. If you want to take the best of government and the best of the private sector in order to strengthen our economy, which I think is what we need down in Washington, then I am the guy that can help do that in a way that nobody else has been able to from this state down in Washington, again, given that government and private sector background. If you want somebody who has foreign policy and national security experience and can put together an alternative budget that will save money overseas and bring that money home and invest it in new job creation, rebuilding our infrastructure, our roads, our railways, buildings, and our bridges, put carpenters, electricians, and pipe fitters and plumbers back to work, then I'm your guy. Because that's part of my 5-point jobs platform that I'm rolling out in the next couple of weeks. If you want a tested campaigner and you want to make sure that you win, as we talked about next November, and you're not just focused on the September primary, then you're talking to a vetted, tested guy who has run year-long campaigns and who has defeated and knows how to defeat incumbent Republicans. So if those are qualifications that matter to you, and you want an effective legislator in the United States Senate for Massachusetts that has accomplished a lot right here in this state on the broad range of issues that you and I work on every single day, protecting our environment, improving our schools, lowering health care costs, managing budgets properly. I have experience in all that. There's no other candidate in this race on the Democratic side that has that kind of experience. So if you want somebody that can hit the ground running and as a first-term senator really be effective for the people of Massachusetts, then Tom Conroy is your guy. And I would encourage everybody who believes that to join the campaign. And you can do that at tomconroy.org.
Tomconroy.org. Well, let me tell you, first of all, Mike, are we getting that lawnmower in the background? Okay. We're up here at beautiful Fuller Village in Milton, senior community, and I think the landscaping crew is right outside our window. I apologize for that. That was a very cogent and compelling argument that you make for your candidacy. So let me go back to the beginning. You talk
Sure.
about your international finance
Yes.
degree,
Yes.
in your experience in the private sector,
Yes.
in your experience in job creation, all clearly quite relevant today in this increasingly global economy in which we are now competing.
Yes.
So in 1980, we were afraid of going to war
That's right.
with Russia, a military battle, or if we were going to, at the time, you remember we had a lot of stuff going on in Iran with
Yes, the hostages. Exactly.
Now we're faced with an economic war where
That's right.
we're competing with folks from throughout the world
That's right.
for jobs. And so you have some significant experience both in the job creation and in the international financial arena, which is quite compelling. You also talked a little bit about your national defense and national security experience. And it seems that there's a lot less of a focus on foreign policy lately in Washington, and we're all focused first and foremost on the jobs and the economy and domestic issues. Almost seems a fatigue with foreign policy.
Which is good, and I want to encourage as I said, the investment of more dollars here. You know, we have 200 bases around the world in over 150 countries. We've got 37,000 troops in South Korea. We've got 45,000 troops in Germany. We've just made a commitment to keep at least 20,000 troops in Kuwait. We've got a 570,000 person standing army. We've got almost 200,000 Marines. And the cuts that they're talking about right now are minuscule in this whole, the super committee effort. They're talking about shaving 9% so that we have 520,000 Army troops and 183,000 Marines. I think we can defend this country extraordinarily well. Again, if you look at the competition that we're up against, with much less dedication to a standing army and much more use of cutting-edge technology so that we are on the front edge of maintaining the best troops, the best soldiers, the best sailors, and the best munitions and weaponry that anybody can possibly produce.
And perhaps...
but all at lower cost.
Right. Perhaps we can't afford to be the world's policeman anymore.
That's exactly right, Senator. And that's where you need to pull back from those bases. We're spending a lot of money overseas. Our military budget, when you add in the Iraq War, the Afghan War, and all the other stuff we're doing on the world, is almost $1 trillion a year. And I think we need to cut that back and invest more of those billions right here in the United States.
We have 5 minutes left. I could speak with you for about 2 hours without any problem because you're clearly well-informed and articulate. Quickly, in 5 minutes, and I'm sorry to do this to you.
That's all right.
First, what do you do to help stimulate our economy,
Yes.
create jobs? And second, attack the deficit. And third, and this will be the last part, work cooperatively and get rid of this toxic environment that we have in Washington.
Yeah, sure. So one is the infrastructure plan. So a 5-point jobs plan centered around rebuilding our infrastructure. So taking that money that we're spending overseas, bringing it back home, and as I talked about, roads, railways, buildings, and bridges. $300 billion.
Just to give you an example, while we were out spending all this money
Yes.
in Iraq and Afghanistan and
Yes.
throughout the world, I went to China 8 years ago. I went back to China this year, and there was a whole new section of the airport in Beijing that didn't exist 8 years ago.
There you go.
That was larger than Logan Airport by a lot. But there were also, in the center of the city, there were 3 separate train stations that didn't exist 8 years ago, each with just absolute state-of-the-art, 200-mile-an-hour trains. That
There you go.
this the huge investment in infrastructure
Yes.
that we seem to have neglected here at home.
Exactly right. And we need to compete effectively against the Chinese and the Indians. You look at the railway station in New Delhi and the commuter rail focus there. It's extraordinary. It makes Boston look like a second or third world nation in a sense. So infrastructure is number one. Alternative energy and sophisticated manufacturing, I think, is another area where we can do more on tax credits. And the key here is not just tax credits and wish the companies good luck, because we've had mixed success there. I think the interesting mechanism that is both nonpartisan or even potentially very politically viable that I would introduce is almost like a venture capital mechanism. And this is something that we did up at the State House that I introduced. Again, taking that private sector background, public sector background, pulling them together. If we make investments in the alternative energy arena or in sophisticated manufacturing where
we're falling behind right now behind the Chinese and the Germans.
Exactly right. Yes, and I'm particularly focused on sophisticated manufacturing against the Germans because they are exporting more of that than we are and any other country in the world. And we can compete effectively, but we need to facilitate as elected officials and as government leaders the combination of high tech and manufacturing together, and we can do that extraordinarily well here in manufacturing in Massachusetts, to create new jobs and get an equity stake in those joint ventures and have that equity stake pay for a revolving fund of tax credits, loans, and grants to those two industries such that over the long term it is deficit neutral. And once you make those initial investments and you have some real winners, you can then sell that equity stake, refund the tax credits, and over the course of the next 5 decades, we can have a lot of growth, a lot of job growth, a lot of exports, and it's going to be completely deficit neutral. And I think that appeals to the Republicans in a very positive way.
It's an excellent plan, and I'm sorry to make you go through this pretty complex stuff so quickly, but it's an excellent plan. And the final thing is, you know, we enjoy pretty good relations on Beacon Hill. Republicans and Democrats alike work together cooperatively, but there's this toxic environment in D.C. that seems to be a turn to all Americans.
That's right.
What do you do about that?
Well, when I worked in the United States Senate, albeit as a staffer, I saw a very different culture, one of collegiality, cooperation, and compromise. We need to return to that culture, and I think we need somebody who believes and has the patience that the United States Senate is the greatest deliberative body in the entire world. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for it. And whether it's a kid that grew up with 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers and is an intermediary or compromiser, or whether it's the fact that I can talk to janitors and CEOs almost in the same breath, or that I've worked in government, business, and the nonprofit sector, and that I can bring this diversity of experience together to create personal relationships across the aisle. I think I'm exactly the kind of guy that we need down in Washington to bridge the gaps that have opened up, end the polarization, get the United States Senate focused on generating results, and get this country moving forward again. We've got great people in this country. We've got great potential for prosperity and success. We need to make sure that Washington is working in partnership with business to go forward successfully, and I'm just the guy to do that.
Well, thank you very much. You know, for those of you who are watching, let me just politely suggest carefully scrutinize all of the candidates, not necessarily just the person with the most money or the most television commercials and the like, but look carefully at the credentials of each of the candidates, their policies, their ideas, their sincerity, their intellect, etc. And look very carefully at Tom Conroy, clearly a qualified individual taking a shot at the United States Senate and an opportunity to represent us at a higher level. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming.
Senator, thank you so much. It's great to be here.